Hello, Thrive Nation. I hope you Thrivers are doing well. And I've got one of my absolute business heroes, and his name is Mike Dillard. He is part of my community. The reason is I've been listening to his voice for many, many years. His podcast is probably one of the top 3 podcasts that I listen to. And this man, I describe him as a futurist. He's a futurist because he sees trends way before others. And I wish I knew him from 2005 because I think my life would be different. But there are no regrets because I've learned so much from him already. I've probably listened to every single podcast that he's produced. And so I'm so grateful that he's giving me some of his time, an hour of his time on the Made to Thrive show. And it's obviously in our infancy here in South Africa. But welcome to the show, Mike Dillard.
Thank you for that very kind intro, Steve. I really do appreciate that. Thank you for listening and for your support.
Brilliant. I want to take a little bit of a narrative here between your entrepreneurial journey and your health journey. I called Mike onto the show, Thrivers, because I believe we can learn from his journey as a business person. He helps entrepreneurs, and we'll go through his journey from waiting tables to, the millions and millions and millions of dollars in sales that he's made online and abroad, to his health, which has struggled at times, and he's had some conditions that he's going to sort of unpack. He's just been through a rough time over the last 2 weeks. So I do appreciate that he's given himself over to us for an hour. But Mike, I do want to start in the beginning from your entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, you were waiting tables at the same time as those seasons. Why don't you just tell us how your health was, and also what value did you place on your health? Because I've worked with entrepreneurs in the executive coaching space as well as a physician in my other life for 22 years. And I find that business owners, high executive corporates, as well as entrepreneurs, and those are obviously 3 different distinctions, they don't often value their health until their health actually is destroyed. So tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah. I grew up highly competitive, always playing sports. So from the time I could walk, I was competing in sports, and was a professional mountain bike racer in high school and college. I won the Texas State Championships twice. And then after graduating college, started pursuing life as an entrepreneur. And gosh, I can say that I never paid attention to my body, other than the fact that, I'd always had good baseline habits from my professional sports history. And so I knew what it meant to work out, and I knew what it meant to eat well. But when applied to business, there was that addiction to adrenaline and just go, A-type, got to get things done, that when carried into business, in a business setting, specifically sitting at a desk for 8, 9, 10 hours a day on a computer, I would start to use tools like caffeine to really focus my brain in on the tasks that were at hand during the day, significant amounts of caffeine. And then I would use alcohol at night to wind down with dinner and to slow the body down. And for me, my body was really just a tool that my brain used to get things done. And that was the extent of it. And I think that that's a really common theme that I see in entrepreneurs as well. And that worked until, I would say, about the age of 40. And then I hit 40, and those same habits that I had had for the previous 20 years, body couldn't keep up with that. And it finally kind of hit its breaking point, where my ability to detox was overwhelmed by a situation that I was living in, which was an apartment in downtown Austin that ended up having toxic mold in it. And I didn't realize what that was, but I could start to feel my health going dramatically south in a very quick way over the course of, I'd say, 3 to 6 months. My ability to handle stress just fell off a cliff. My ability to sleep at night started to deteriorate significantly. Even just having 1 cup of coffee would be overstimulating for my system. And it just started to go south really, really bad, until it hit a tipping point where it basically broke, and it caused a brain injury, which has now taken me about 3 years to recover from. But I've got I can go in any direction you want from there, because I know I kind of covered a lot in a very short period of time.
Cool.
But yeah.
Well, let's maybe start with you, just in your entrepreneurial journey. If you can just let people know, I think you've done hundreds of millions of dollars in online sales.
Not that much, not that much. I've started 3 successful businesses. The first one was in my 20s, and those 3 companies have done a combined total of about $60 million in revenue. And they're all businesses that have started around passions of mine that I've run from my home, and I've kept them, really as lifestyle businesses. I didn't build a giant office, and all of that stuff. But they were all very successful in their own right. And the first one was in the network marketing industry. I got started in that industry in college. This is, in the early 2000s, 2000 to 2005. This is before social media, before Facebook, before YouTube, before any of those platforms. And so as a young man without a lot of money, network marketing was one of the only opportunities that were out there that I think was something that I could just jump in with 2 feet and get started in. It took me about 5 years to figure that industry out before I ever made a dollar. But once I did, and I kind of cracked the code, if you will, I did very well. I went from waiting tables at a PF Chang's to making my first million within about 18 months, turned that into a $25 million business. And I want to say about 5 years after that, I graduated, I guess myself from that industry. And I started a second business in the financial education space. I wanted to educate myself on how to invest all the money that I was making, because at the time I was spending all of it and having a lot of fun, but I was really not taking advantage of the opportunity that I'd created for myself from a financial independence standpoint. Started that business at the end of 2010, 2011, did really well. We did over $3 million in revenue in our first 7 days, 8 figures in our first year, 25 million in our first 2 or 3 years. I ended up selling that business to my business partner 3 years in. And then I started a hydroponics company. I got into hydroponics, and I invented the first fully automated hydroponic robot for your kitchen. And we got to the prototype stage of that, where we had one of the units in my house. And unfortunately, after about 3 years of development, that's when I started to actually get sick with the toxic mold. And so we had to kind of pull the plug on that. And then my full-time focus for the last 3 years since then has really been recovering from a health perspective.
Great. Let's talk about how you would have done things differently from your first entrepreneurial project in terms of your health, looking after your health, managing your health, because I think there's a lot of business owners in South Africa and Africa and beyond that would want to know what are the key signs that they could watch out for. Because one thing I've enjoyed about you, Mike, is you've got the most incredible analytical mind. You process things, you distill things, you make things simple. So if you had to take yourself back, and I'm finding more and more, I've got to start looking at some significant functional medicines audits earlier. So even in people's 20s, I've got to start looking at these numbers. How would you have done it differently from your first entrepreneurial project?
I think I'll have a pretty different take on this, but every entrepreneur that I know has come from a background or a childhood that had some challenges in it. And those challenges are what created the competitive nature and or the drive that is required to be willing to take the kind of risks that we take as an entrepreneur, to put in the hours and the kind of work that we put in to build the world that we want to live in, because it's perceived as safe or a solution to the challenges we had when we were younger, or it's the counterbalance to whatever happened in your youth. And for my youth, it was significant bullying for many, many years throughout middle school and high school. So that created the drive for me to prove myself and to do something of significance and all of that good stuff. And it also creates a lot of trauma. And when you're a high achiever, A-type personality, and a driver that is fueled by an unhealthy experience or set of experiences when you were younger, well, then you usually end up tempering that drive with substances of some kind. Again, it could be alcohol, it could be weed, it could be food, it could be sex, it could be whatever it may be, to essentially buffer and kind of smooth off the edges, if you will, of this overwhelming drive that you have to do something with your life that's significant. And so I don't think I would have done anything differently when I was younger, because if you don't address the root core cause that is driving those types of types of behaviors and that type of consumption, then you're never going to notice it, and you're certainly not going to want to get rid of it, because it's serving a purpose for you. And that purpose is usually required for you to continue to do the work that you're doing and try to build and achieve and do whatever it is that you're being driven to do. And so you're going to tend to ignore it until it cannot be ignored anymore. And that's the pattern that I usually see in entrepreneurs: is they push and push and push and push and push until the body literally breaks, and they have an experience that they can't ignore anymore. And then at that point, it could be considered a midlife crisis or whatever it may be, but they've pushed their body past the breaking point. Now they're forced to deal with the aftermath, and it's a longer process at that point. But then the question becomes, are you going to go back and actually address the core trauma that was driving this behavior, from your childhood, or are you not? And are you going to maybe try to get on a diet, or try to work out, or try to drink less alcohol, or try to remove these buffering activities? And the challenge with that is that trying things never really works, because you're trying to change, a behavior at the end of the day that is being driven by subconscious programs that you're, one, unaware of, and two, it's kind of hardwired in there. And so it's like when people try to buy gym equipment and they use it for a week, and then it goes, into the garage, or it never gets used again. Or people who get on a diet and they want to eat healthy, and that lasts a month, and then they fall off the diet. And this is what happens for 95% of people. And the reason that is taking place is because the previous behavior was serving a very important protective purpose for the mind and the body that it equates as important to its survival. And if you try to force this subconscious out of that pattern into a new one without addressing the root cause, it isn't going to work. It's just going to cause stress and anxiety until you eventually cave in and go back to your old habits and your old patterns. So to answer your question, I think in a short synopsis way, short summary, is that you would have to go back and address the root core causes that were driving those health habits in order to actually change them. And I don't think most people will ever get to a point where they're willing to put in that kind of work or face that kind of challenge until they're forced to, like I was. If I hadn't been forced to because of the brain injury and the mold, I probably would have never addressed those parts of my life, and they would have never changed. So,
sure, it sounds quite a hectic story, and it reminds me of Naval Ravikant's sort of little saying that says the seed to change is often suffering, and the only way people change is when they suffer. I believe Mike Dillard mentoring and Steve Stavs mentoring can do it different for the next generation, and I'll tell you why. In 22 years, I've never seen people get so sick so quickly and so early. And possibly the entrepreneurs in our generation, in our 40s, have got away with it. They've gotten away with it because they had maybe 20 years of good living, outside living, generally clean air, less toxicity, less radiation. I'm a geobiologist by training, spent a lot of time looking at radiation, electromagnetic fields, high frequency and radio waves that are coming from cell phone towers, taking watches, Apple watches and Garmin watches off people's arms, getting away from Bluetooth. So looking at the radiation that is exponentially growing, the things of glyphosate, having interviewed one of the top specialists, Dr. Senef, on what's happening with glyphosate. 75% of a lot of states in America, the air and the water contain glyphosate. That's causing genetic changes And so if you were mentoring some young entrepreneurs, possibly some of them would go along that route, but possibly some of them would be open to learning before things break, because things are breaking and things are breaking in a far more dramatic way. And so how do we empower people? How do we motivate people without them, having that driving force of the soul wounds that have probably happened from, their upbringing, and link them to their passion and their purpose, their unique gifting that they've got, and let that be a driving, motivating factor of changing the world, rather than from the pain and from those soul wounds that often drive them. I know that mentoring processes are key and crucial. If you had to take that paradigm, what would you say to 20-year-old entrepreneurs who might not listen, but you might even just get 1 out of 50, Mike? You might get 10 out of 50. And now those 10 are going to have far greater longevity than the other 40. Because with cancer almost overtaking heart disease and people getting so sick so quickly, we're going to have a windfall of sickness and disease.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think it's an unfortunate part of just, modern day living on planet Earth. And, unfortunately, but yeah, no, you're right. I think the key is telling the stories that we have to share, like me sharing this, my story right now on this show, because it is the catalyst for the very first step. And the first step for anything is awareness. And so, by sharing my story, I can help people become aware, so that maybe when they, start to not feel so hot in their life, or run into some problems, they'll be like, hey, I remember when Mike talked about this, and they can go back and start to be proactive as far as the solutions that they were going to pursue. And that does work. I know many young entrepreneurs who are around the age of 25 to 30, who are in kind of our circle here in Austin, who are doing the kind of work on their minds, their spirit, and their body that many of us in our 40s are doing. They're now doing in their late 20s and early 30s, because they've seen the benefits that we've gotten from it personally, and the transformation that we've had, and they're using that as an advantage in business now. They're becoming healthier individuals mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that's having dividends on their happiness and their business growth. And so I think that it's a trend that's starting to take hold now, and to gain some traction, which I think is fantastic.
Great. You did mention, I think, in one of your podcasts that there was a little click that actually happened in your brain at a stage. You still remember that day. Take us through that click. What happened? What doctors you saw? Let's discuss a bit of functional medicine. What's been helpful? What hasn't been helpful? The learnings that have come from your health journey.
Yeah. I was sitting on the couch one day playing a video game, and felt a little click in my brain, and thought that was kind of odd, and that was the beginning of a very long journey. The first year was the most challenging, because we didn't know what was going on. The main symptom was that I couldn't physically fall asleep, no matter what kind of drugs or sleep aids that I used. It was an extreme fight or flight response, and it lasted for almost a year. And we finally found a combination of drugs that would get me about 2 hours of sleep a night instead of 0, which is what really saved my life. But I went to probably 5 or 6 different doctors. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. I finally went to a functional medicine doctor that a friend introduced me to, and they said, hey, you should go take a mycotoxin test. And I did that, and the test went from a scale of 0 to 50. Anything above 5 is toxic, and my result was 21,000. And so I had an extreme level of mycotoxins in my system, and mycotoxins are also neurotoxins, so they affect the brain and brain chemistry. And essentially, my body was being decomposed alive by mold, and so it was freaking out. It was as if it was being eaten alive by a lion, but this lion was microscopic, and so I couldn't see it. The other doctors couldn't see it until we finally took that test. And then so that took about a year before we got to that point, and now it's taken the last 2 years to to heal from that process. And it's been a comprehensive healing pursuit in the fact that it's required we moved 6 times in 12 months to finally find a house that did not have mold in it, because the healing process for toxic mold doesn't begin until you get out of exposure. And that's unfortunately very hard to do here in the South in the United States. And then all kinds of different therapy to help heal the body and the brain from the trauma that it went through during that year-long period. So all different kinds of plant medicines, Wachuma, MDMA, psilocybin, hypnotherapy, EMDR therapy, transcranial magnetic therapy, neurobiofeedback therapy, anything and everything that I could do to retrain the brain and get it out of the kind of a stuck limbic state, which is what can happen when you go through a toxic mold experience. And so, yeah, that's what the process has looked like. And it's been a long one, but it's also had a ton of benefits that have come out of all of that work that I've done as well. I've, at this point, I don't think I've ever been healthier from a blood work perspective, because I haven't had alcohol in 3 years. For the first time in my life, I haven't had caffeine in 3 years. I eat, gluten-free, paleo, anti-inflammatory, all organic diet. And so from that perspective, it's, it was a really beneficial experience. But yeah.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about any IV infusions, ozone, maybe some hyperbaric. Did you do any of those type of treatments? What did the functional medicine doc do other than what you've mentioned?
A lot of, I guess, detoxing from mold starts with getting out of exposure, and then really using binders, different kinds of binders. And there's different binders that bind to different types of mycotoxins. And so I'm on 3 different binders at the moment. I'm on activated charcoal. I'm on a binder that is based on beetroots that has a certain type of electrical charge that, binds to this mycotoxin. I'm on Corella, as well, which is another binder that can be used successfully. And so binding those mycotoxins to then expel them from the body is important, but then you have to then focus on reopening up the methylation pathways, which is what your body uses to, rid itself of waste. Because when, you're at that level of exposure, that's what happens is those methylation pathways get overwhelmed and they just stop working. And your body literally can't process the waste anymore. It builds up in your body until shit starts breaking. So going through that process, using glutathione, B vitamins, anything else methylation, related was really important. We did a lot of NAD IVs, glutathione IVs, and I have stayed away from hyperbaric just because I'm a little claustrophobic, and I think that would cause more harm than good at this point. I've done some sauna work. Obviously, sweat is another major detox pathway as well. It's very important. A ton of supplements. I was probably on $1,500 a month worth of supplements. Blood work every 3 months. Gosh, I'm trying to just think of everything that I've done, but I would say the vast majority of it was getting into a clean environment, opening up the methylation pathways, and then using binders to rid the body of the toxin. And my toxin levels have dramatically reduced over time. And at the end of the day, what severe toxic mold can cause is what is CIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And that's when your body is constantly inflamed and it's just attacking itself in ways, and it can cause all kinds of autoimmune problems and issues. Luckily, I didn't have any of those. And, there's different tests that you can take, different genetic tests that you can take to see, do you have CIRS or do you not have CIRS? And that's an epigenetics component where these genes are getting activated or deactivated. And there you have genes that allow your body to detox mycotoxins, and those genes in me got turned off, so my body could no longer detox those. And fortunately, we took some new DNA tests about 3 months ago that show that I am no longer responding as a SIRS patient would, which means those genes have been turned, back to the correct setting that they should have been. Again, which is great because that's just proof that the body can heal itself when it's given the support that it needs. So that's really where we're at now. And the last piece of the puzzle for me, I think, we'll take another mycotoxin test here in about 3 months. Hopefully that's going to show 0 or close to 0 at that point. And then it's just healing the nervous system from the trauma that was, caused by that level of attack, basically.
Oh, thanks for that, Mark. It seems like there's quite a lot of emotion related to that journey. How did your loved ones cope with it? And how did you cope just not being able to obviously work like you used to? I know you interviewed the folk from the Chili Pad. We're the distributors here for Chili Pad and Ula in South Africa. But how did your family respond to you? And also from a business aspect, how tough was that?
Yeah, hardest thing I've ever done for sure, because I couldn't work for nearly 3 years. And thankfully, I had an email list and an audience that I could run affiliate promotions to, or, previous promotions for our old products to. And that's really what helped me pay the bills and pay for my medical treatment. If it hadn't been for that, I don't know what I would have done. I probably would have ended up moving in with my parents for a while. We have employees and we still have probably $40,000-$50,000 a month in overhead. And that adds up very quickly when you're not bringing in revenue or income. So luckily the email list really saved me from that, in that regard. But yeah, it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. There were certainly some periods in the beginning, especially when we didn't know what it was. That was the hardest part, is that first year, because when you don't know what the issue is, it's hard to have hope. You could have told me I had anything and I would have been thrilled, because at least we know and we have something that we can work towards and have hope to recover from. But when you go to 5 doctors and none of them know what's wrong with you and they don't know how to help you, that's a really hopeless feeling. And that led to severe depression and suicidal tendencies and, things like that. And you also lose your identity when you can't do anything that you used to enjoy. So I essentially couldn't work, couldn't eat the foods that I enjoyed, couldn't drink the drinks that I enjoyed, couldn't have caffeine, couldn't do any of the activities that I liked, couldn't hang out with my friends or go out with them, couldn't play video games, couldn't work on my business, couldn't race cars. So I really lost every single aspect of my life. And I spent a good 2 years living on my couch and moving from my couch in the day to my bed at night. And that's all that I did, was really try to survive. And, it was, again, the hardest thing I've ever been through, but also one of the best, because it forced me to let go of all of those, things that I thought were important or that I depended on in my life. And it forced me to reevaluate every single aspect of life. And it gave me the opportunity to rebuild, I think, in a much healthier, more balanced way now these days. So as tough as it was also as beneficial. I think if this hadn't happened, I probably would have ended up having a heart attack, maybe even by now, with the kind of life that I was living. Again, just 10 out of 10, 9,000 RPM, pushing the engine as hard as I could day and night. You're eventually going to hit that breaking point.
Well, thanks, Mark. And I think your story is going to be powerful for many people out there. So I really recommend, or just encourage you to get it out there, because I think it's going to prevent a lot of people from going through the processes that you went through. And a lot of your genes were dirty. I don't know if you know Dr. Ben Lynch's work, but he's got a fantastic book called Dirty Genes, talking about methylation. They were probably dirty for a long time, and eventually it was just an accumulation,
Yep.
and then boom. And so we want to make sure that entrepreneurs who do change the world, maintain some type of balance, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, because it's almost they've got to be so passionate about how they change the world at all other costs. But like I said before, they are breaking very, very quickly. Tell us a little bit about your sleep. Has it been totally restored, renewed? Are you tracking your sleep data? Are you waking up pretty refreshed in the morning?
No, unfortunately, that's the last piece of the puzzle that's still been a struggle. I still rely on a bunch of supplements and things like that to basically knock myself out, at night. And my best guess is that, going through a toxic mold exposure, it can overactivate the limbic system, which activates the adrenal glands and your cortisol levels, and can affect melatonin production and things like that. And so that's something that I'm still, working on and healing. I tracked my sleep data every night with an Oura Ring for years. I actually just stopped using that about a week ago. And yeah, so that's the last piece of the puzzle. And I think it really just comes down to healing the limbic system, healing the vagus nerve, and the components of the body that are, really there to take your body into parasympathetic or sympathetic, and to keep that balance. And for many, many years, I'd say over a decade, I didn't have any balance. I was in sympathetic mode, 24/7 basically. And so kind of healing that piece of the puzzle, I think is really the last component here. So
I've seen that on your podcast, very business oriented. You started having some doctors on the show, just talking about your history, sort of unpacking the process and that. Probably, what do you think the greatest learning you've had personally by having these doctors on the show and just discussing health? Because I think it's, I was encouraged to see this, a man who's been so successful in business and truly successful, that's created a significant amount of wealth in businesses, start looking at the other aspect that has to be looked at in terms of maximizing performance. Because what I do know is entrepreneurs are interested in performance, in cognitive ability. And I think probably one of the most frightening things is when your cognitive ability decreases, things change. When you can't move as quickly and analyze as quickly and can't articulate as quickly and make decisions as quickly, it's a very frightening process. So what are the greatest learnings of the health people that you've had on your show?
I don't know if there's anything specific learnings from a health perspective, other than just generally being inspired by the technology that's available to all of us today. The kind of tests, genetic tests and everything that are available to us today, and the information that we can glean from that is just absolutely amazing. The types of new therapies that are on the cutting edge of functional medicine, again, like psychedelics and plant medicines and things like that, are just literally life-changing opportunities that exist now, which is just absolutely awesome. Because I think 5-6 years ago, it would have been a very different story, because the test that I required to even find the mold, probably didn't exist. And so that, to me, is probably the most inspiring part of the conversations that I've had with those physicians, is just the amount of help that is required today. Is if you choose to be, you can become superhuman. Like, you can manage your health in a way that's never been possible before. And that's really exciting and very, very cool and very inspiring.
Brilliant. You've just gone through a tough time with COVID. Tell us a little bit about that story. What was going through your mind emotionally? Now you can't breathe, you're battling. You've obviously gone through the mold, toxicity problem, and now you've got this, and it's hitting you hard.
We've really lived our life normally during this whole COVID, deal. We kept traveling, and, we don't wear masks unless we have to. And I've looked at all the data, and for me, COVID was something that is not a threat to a normal average person. And the amount of fear that has been, spun up around it, to me is far more damaging than the virus itself. And so, we finally got it. I think I got it coming back from a trip from Aspen a couple of weeks ago. I'd assume so. That would be the most logical, because I started to show some symptoms about a week later after we got back. And it started with a fever, and started taking all of the supplements that I take them every day, but I just started to up the dose of, zinc and vitamin D and C and things like that. And then, got a fever that went up to almost 104, which is dangerous territory, brain damage territory at that point, which was quite concerning. So we went and got a COVID test that came back positive. Unfortunately for me, I was positive for COVID and the normal flu. So I had both of them at the exact same time. And ironically, the flu, I believe, was worse than COVID. And how do you tell the difference? Well, at least according to my doctors, the really high 104 fever is from the normal flu. COVID usually has a low grade fever that's around 100, 101. And yeah, so that big fever was really tough for a couple of days. The COVID thing, we started taking ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. I, have an blood oxygen meter, so I could monitor that, which is really one of the main pieces of data that you want to monitor. My blood O2 levels are normally 98, 99, and then it started to drop to 96, and then 95, and then 94. And I started to get the cough that people talk about. This is probably 6-7 days in now. And that got concerning because I wanted to make sure that, one, I didn't end up in a hospital and didn't get intubated, or because that's where stuff really starts to get nasty and people start to die. And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't turning into pneumonia. And so went and got a CAT scan done. It was negative on pneumonia. It was just kind of that crystalline spider web structure that comes from COVID that had taken root. So we started using a nebulizer with a colloidal silver mixed in and a steroid to open up the lungs. And I'd say after about a day or two of that really started to clear things up. And I'd say probably 3 days after that, fever went away, blood oxygen level started to go back up to 96, 97. And that was pretty much it. And we were done. We were done with it at that point. And so the whole grand scheme of things, I would say from start to finish, was about a 10-day experience. And at the end of the day, there was we spent most of the day in bed, had a lot of fatigue, had some fevers to deal with, and a little bit of a breathing issue for a little bit, but not that big of a deal at the end of the day. Mold was 1,000 times worse. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that's good. Obviously, you didn't go through too much emotions because, coming off the back of your health journey, it might have been a big concern, what it was going to do to you. Do you have any of those feelings or you want to share?
I didn't, luckily I didn't have any fear around it because I have taken such good care of my body recovering from mold the last few years. And I was like, man, if it can get through this and all of my supplements, it deserves to win, frankly. But yeah, I really didn't have any fear around it, just because we've taken such good care of our health that I couldn't imagine, something really going south. And so it never really became a concern. It was more of an inconvenience than anything.
Right. And at Made to Thrive here, we're really into just declaring freedom, just breaking enslavement to debt, to financial institutions, breaking enslavement to pharmaceuticals, as important as they are. It's not non-use of pharmaceuticals, but it's correct use. And pharmaceuticals are fantastic and they're incredible, but they're really for emergency medicine. Tell us about just the future of biotech, where you see it going. You've obviously gone through your own history of health issues now. You're probably so much more aware of it. I've spent a lot of time talking to people about how important health coaches are, how important group visits are, that these functional medicine doctors are so busy across the world, they can't see, the patients. Mark Hyman from the Cleveland Clinic said, your community is the greatest force to bring about change, sustained change. Tell us where you think the biotech industry is going.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The tech, again, the technology and the diagnostics are getting better and better every year. At the same time, I think Western medicine is so focused on treating the symptoms that it's unfortunate, because I think the majority of people are going to just be sick in general, the average person in society, and then they're going to have to get an intervention of some kind of Western medicine to address the symptoms that they have or whatever it may be. But I think specifically in the West, it is becoming a more and more just unhealthy society in general, just from, as you've mentioned, the things that are in the environment that are constantly, have us under attack. That being healthy and choosing a healthy lifestyle these days, and taking the high quality supplements, is no longer a nice to have. It is a need to have. It is basically a counterattack that is required to keep the body in balance at this point. And I think there is a growing movement, specifically with our group of friends here in Texas and in Austin, to get off the grid. I've got tons of friends that are buying land. They're building greenhouses, they're building gardens, they're building chicken coops, and they're really taking, their food under control, under their own sovereign control. And I think that movement's just going to continue to grow, because the only other solution that I can think of is leaving the U.S., specifically moving to somewhere like Costa Rica or Bali, or somewhere else in South America where Monsanto is not present yet, glyphosate is not being used every day, and when you can really just get back to a normal, healthy, balance with nature and the foods that you're eating. And again, here in the United States, I think it's a war basically against corporate processed agriculture companies, food production, and drug companies that all profit by either giving you the least nutrient dense and least healthy foods possible, because that's where the profit margins are, and then selling you the drugs to fix the health challenges that arise from those habits. And unfortunately, it's going to take money to just live a healthy life these days, to eat organic food, to buy land, or take the supplements that you need to take. All of the functional medicine doctors that I use, they don't take insurance. It's all cash. It's $500 to $1,000 a visit, and most people don't have that ability, unfortunately. So it's going to be an interesting, brave new world in the years to come, for sure.
Great. I did your crypto course, which I thought was incredible, because once again, breaking the enslavement to these financial institutions, these evil sort of central banks, what they're doing, how they're debasing our our finances, and the dollar, and even the rand here has weakened significantly, just printing money. And how would you sort of see the future of money? I've listened to a lot of the Preston Fishers and the Michael Saylors, what they've done, and how important it is to look at finances, because that's probably going to be your only way that you're going to be able to buy the land and do the aquaponics or the hydroponics, or get out of the sort of if it's possible 5G network. It's possible here in South Africa. But tell us a little about where probably the future of money is, the future of crypto is. I think it's really important that people understand that you got to get out of the control and sort of the structures that are in place, which are there really just to sort of weaken you and shackle you into the system.
It's going to be, blockchain technology is going to be a blessing and a curse, meaning it is enabling the decentralization of all kinds of different industries, which on one hand is phenomenal. And on the other hand, it is also creating, it is a technology that can be used to enslave people, because then everything that you do can be tracked. And so, fortunately, Bitcoin specifically, and Ethereum, and decentralized finance that's coming out and being built upon Ethereum right now is creating unprecedented levels of disruption and potential freedom, financially, for the first time in human history, where this is the very first technology and the first form of money that has ever existed in all of human history that is completely free from governments. It is not owned by any government institution. It's not owned by a person. It's not owned by a company. It's not under the control of any kind of entity. It is fully distributed around the globe. Every single person on the planet with a cell phone can participate in it, and they can do so without anybody else's permission. And that is a paradigm shift that humanity has never seen before. So it's very exciting what is coming down the road in that perspective. And it's going to be very interesting, because it is going to allow anything and everything to be turned into a form of money, meaning every single asset in the world that you can think of, from real estate to your business to your car to the art that you produce, the books that you have, the content that you create. Every single thing can be tokenized now and turned into an asset that can be traded and or exchanged on an open market. And that's never been possible before either. So that's going to be really interesting, because the concept of money is going to change. It's no longer going to be, dollars or paper. When you can literally tokenize your house and use these tokens from a home equity perspective to go buy groceries with in the next 5 years, or a car with, or whatever else it may be. And so that's going to be really, really interesting when you have thousands, potentially tens of thousands of these tokens that are tied to assets that can then be traded or spent just like money can. And so it's going to be interesting. I don't know exactly, where that's going to go, but it's going to be fascinating for sure.
So the person listening out there, Mike, should they put a percentage of their portfolio in crypto? I mean, I know this is not sort of financial advice at all, but I do know people are listening out there and they really are trying to get out of the shackles, enslavement to big pharma and to these big medical insurance companies that, don't have their best interests at heart. It is about bottom line. It is about finances. Now, what should they be doing from a financial point of view?
Well, in my opinion, if you look at history, every single fiat currency that has ever been created has died. 100% track record. Most of them, I believe, the average lifespan is 25 to 30 years. The United States dollar and the British pound are the two longest lasting in history, and they're at the end of their life cycle, as far as I'm concerned. If you just look at the charts and the amount that they are being abused and printed right now, they're being devalued and they're being abused and they're being taken for granted by our government, and they're spending their way and they're printing their way out of every problem that pops up. And that eventually leads to the collapse of that fiat currency. And so I think that's absolutely inevitable. I think there will be at some point a digital US dollar, a digital, blockchain based dollar that will replace the US dollar. But it'll just serve as a normal digital currency like the money we have now. It's not going to appreciate in value. But if you look at something like Bitcoin, that is finite in supply, there's only 21 million Bitcoin that'll ever exist. It's not controlled by a government. So the US government can't change the rules. It can't print more of them. It can't control it. It can't stop it. You look at what's happening with all the fiat currencies around the world, and then you say, hey, what's the safest, smartest place to put my dollars if they're losing 15% or more per year in value? Well, it's traditionally been gold, because gold is hard to print. It costs money to mine and pull out of the ground. But as your dollar is devalued and people put their money into gold and the price rises, well, that incentivizes gold miners to go dig more of it up out of the ground, and then they can sell it and make more money. But as they do that, then they're increasing the supply, which then eventually causes the price to decrease, right? Well, with Bitcoin, that's not possible, because you can't mine more than the 21 million of it. That's it. And so you have 21 million Bitcoin. At some point down the road, I would say 20%'s been permanently lost. So you're really thinking about, 15 million Bitcoin total that are going to be divided amongst every person and or company on the planet. And all of the trillions of dollars in debt and credit and fiat currencies that are floating around the world, Bitcoin is the ultimate store value. I don't see anything better. I've never seen anything better. I think all of that money is going to flow into Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I think we're going to see Bitcoin end up between $100,000 and $500,000 here in the next 12 months. It'll certainly have its moment where it pops, and then, we have a couple of year drawdown and it refines its new balance. And then after that, I think next cycle, Bitcoin will be at $1 million or more per Bitcoin. So I have 90% of my money in Bitcoin and crypto. I've been investing in it since 2013. And now that we have the legal infrastructure for the very first time in place that essentially legalizes Bitcoin, meaning banks are now approved to use it, buy it, sell it, store it, and custody it. Wall Street has the green light to do the same thing. U.S. exchanges are federally approved now. We have futures markets. We have an ETF that's now live in Canada. We're going to get one here in the United States soon. So Bitcoin is here to stay. It is being integrated into the existing financial system, and I think all of the worthless pieces of paper that are out there floating around the world are going to end up being sucked into the basically the gravity well that Bitcoin is creating. So for me, the answer is overwhelmingly yes. If you do not own Bitcoin right now, I think you should absolutely put a decent amount of your money in Bitcoin. And if you're going to do that, you also need to get educated, because Bitcoin is still a speculative asset. It is still a new asset class. It is still highly volatile. And so if you're not used to, your Bitcoin portfolio going up or down by 20% in the course of a month, then maybe you shouldn't be involved in it. But I think everybody should at least get to a point where they own one Bitcoin. And if you do that, I believe that ensures that you'll be amongst the next generation of quote unquote millionaires. I think one Bitcoin is going to be equal to, again, $1 million. So if you be a future millionaire, I think owning one Bitcoin at minimum will ensure that.
Great. And we'll put links to Mike's crypto course. Very informative, incredible product. I gained a lot out of it, and I'm in the infancy of the process. And so we'll put those in the show notes and link the community there. Mike, I've got a 16-year-old son who's an entrepreneur who started 16 businesses. He's going well, and he's learning, and he's got an insatiable desire to keep growing. A 5-year-old daughter, and the two pillars that I think are the most important thing that I'm putting into their life, especially my 5-year-old daughter, because it was almost like a second chance and a clean slate, is purpose and community. If they understand that they carry a unique purpose, and I say to my daughter every single day, you have a unique purpose, and you can actually use it to change the world, to transform many people's lives. And that's going to bring you much joy, much fulfillment, much satisfaction. And at Made to Thrive, we use a word called Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is a Stoic philosophy that talks about contentment and fulfillment. And it's almost the opposite of hedonism or hedonic joy, which is the immediate pleasure. It's the dopamine hit that we get. And that's cool, and that's great, and we need that as well. But it really should look at about an 80% eudaimonic joy versus 20%, hedonistic joy. Purpose, in terms of, every single person carries a uniqueness that they can bring to this world. How would you say to, I know you've got a child. I don't know how many children you've got. I think you've got one daughter that I've seen on Instagram.
I have one son and a stepdaughter. Yep.
Okay, and so. What would you do from a purpose? How would you facilitate them finding their purpose and then living out their purpose?
That's a great question. That is a great question. Right now for us, we really focus on letting them experience as many things as, they want. They're 9 and 10 years old, and just explore and to see what grabs their interest and what they gravitate towards. I think both of them are still at an age where they're trying to figure out what they are really passionate about and what they love, and what they're going to take an interest in. And so for us, it's about giving them as many experiences as they can to kind of help figure that out, and then focusing on values, the values of taking personal responsibility, being of service to other people, looking for problems to solve, the importance of taking care of your health, of not trusting pharmaceutical companies that want to put a bunch of nasty stuff in your body for money. The appreciation and the importance of eating good, healthy food and respecting your body, are things that are obviously paramount here at our house. So, that's kind of how we've approached it so far.
Right. And then the second pillar that I think is the most important is your community, the people that you trust. And I released something recently in terms of social media that the people that are truly part of your community are the people you can trust your parents' welfare with or your children's welfare with. And, how important is your community? I know you've been through a very tough time, your own family, your close friends. How important is that pillar with regards to thriving in this life?
Yeah, that's probably the most important. especially over the last few years, I probably wouldn't have survived if it hadn't been for the people in our tribe here and in our community, that have been able to help me with their gifts and their talents. And so, um, yeah, community is the most valuable asset that we have, period, is the people that we know, like, and trust, and that we have relationships with here in town specifically. So yeah, without a doubt, that's number one, especially as the rate of change continues to accelerate, especially here in the United States. We're going to go through a period of unprecedented, very uncomfortable change here in the next 9 years, that is going to cause all kinds of disruption, potentially war, and your community is going to be the most valuable asset you have during a period like that. So
great. Just want to get, as we come to the end of the show, you get your top 3 biohacks. I'll tell you what, having been in health for 22 years, been an active biohacker for 6 years, love the journey with my execs, love the journey with the entrepreneurs. They seem to ask the question, why and why not? They can try this. I'm in the infrared sauna 6 times a week at least. Infrared sauna is my number 1 top biohack, just from a detox point of view, and then from a light diet point of view. My blue blocking glasses that I'm wearing are probably my second most important biohack, because circadian rhythm is so important. There's not a single night that I almost compromise, unless we've got guests and they've never met us before, and we invited them to my home and my wife says, listen, you're not wearing your blue blockers tonight. But generally my light diet is very, very important. And my third most important biohack is probably something like the chili pad or the Ouda, that's really changed my sleep, improved my sleep scores. These things I've incorporated into my life, and I've always had a decently good, nutrient dense diet. And I think, once you've got a certain real food nutrient dense diet, there's other factors that play a huge role. Tell us about probably your top 3 biohacks you found over the recent time.
I think by far and away, number 1 is the Oura Ring, and tracking your sleep data. For me, that was life-changing, because when I started using that, I could see the effect that different foods had on my sleep. I could see the effect that alcohol had on my sleep, and or blue light and things like that. And you could see it, for example, if I did have a drink before we knew what it was, mold, and started that, every once in a while I would still have a drink because I felt so horrible. That was still my kind of go-to way to soothe the pain, right? And I would just have the healthiest alcohol you could, which is straight tequila, right? It's the lowest glycemic, alcohol you can have after straight vodka and things like that. And I would go home and just after having 1 or 2 drinks, and I might have that at 5 or 6 p.m. So fairly early. And I would go to bed at 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And my Oura Ring data my HRV would drop in half, and my resting heart rate would be about 12 beats above normal. And seeing that effect on your phone in an undeniable way, where it's no longer just a feeling, but it's actual data, is like, oh my God, my body is having a really hard time processing this toxin. And I need to stop doing this. And so it really is what got me to stop drinking alcohol ever again. So the Oura Ring was absolutely massive. I could see the same data if I would have dinner that was really high in gluten or dairy, and I would have the exact same effect. And so I, would pull those things out of my diet. The next thing that really helped save my life, especially during the beginning stages of the mold stuff, was the Muse headset. So learning how to meditate and calm the brain down and calm the limbic system down was huge. And everybody talks about meditation, but it's hard to learn how to meditate if you're just trying to lay down and close your eyes and not think, right? It's very hard to do that. But if you have a Muse headset that's giving you real-time feedback via audio signals, you can actually learn how to meditate and you can train your brain. And so I remember I started at 3 to 5 minutes for the first couple of days, and then 10 minutes, and then 15. I got all the way up to 40, 45 minutes. And that 40, 45 minutes would go by like that. It would go by super quick. And I got to a point where I could drop into a meditative brainwave state within 5-10 minutes and hold that. And that just was another completely life-changing tool. Finally, gosh, I would just have to say blood work, going and getting all of your nutrigenome and DNA tests done, and seeing which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off, and then how to start to flip those switches back into the right way with the help of someone who knows that work, and how to do that would be the third most powerful tool that I've used.
Fantastic. And yeah, we distributed the Aura Ring as well as the Muse, as well as doing all the audits here. And those that are listening to the show, made2thrive.co.za, special deals, and you go and check them out. We use the Muse, weekly. Marco uses it, my son, significantly. We track our sleep data. So that's incredible. Mike, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? I know you're taking a break from your podcast and understand listening to your last one, why. But where can people connect with you? I think your crypto course is incredible. Where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks. Just MikeDillard.com would probably be the best place to start. We've got 5 years, more than that, 6-7 years of podcast episodes that are, available under the Mike Dillard Show. And I think that would be the best place to start. Maybe
just one last question, because I'm interested to hear, because I've got you on, is which are the top 3 podcast episodes? I mean, you've got some incredible ones. It's been fantastic.
Oh man.
The Pete Vargas episode is incredible, but yeah, just tell me.
It's tough. I don't think I could pick them because they're so different. We talk about business, we talk about mental health, we talk about, everything that you can imagine. So if you have a specific challenge or interest in your life right now, we have a show for that. So, doing the one with Tony Robbins was really fun, just because he's, always been such a big influence in my life. So getting the chance to hang out with Tony for an hour was amazing. Good Lord. I don't know if I can pick some other specific ones, because we've had almost 400 episodes, and I think all of them have value in some form or fashion. But if you go to MikeDillard.com and go to the podcast section, you'll see all of them listed there, and you can kind of browse through the category and look for something that catches your eye. But it's been an amazing ride for sure.
Very grateful. Last question: where to for Mike Dillard in the next 5 years? What are his aspirations? What is he going to do? How he's going to change the world? Where to from here, Mike?
Our primary focus right now is a business we launched last month called Richer Every Day. And that is designed to help people overcome their subconscious stories when it comes to money, their chemical habits when it comes to money, as far as their neurochemical addictions and how they make decisions. And then ultimately, once we help people heal essentially those two sides of their relationship with money, then we get into passive investing strategies. And the goal here is to help entrepreneurs create enough passive income to replace their active monthly income, so all of their bills are covered. And that way you don't have to worry about making money anymore. And now you can actually go out and make the biggest impact you can possibly make, because I think many people are compromised right now in what they feel like they can say, what they feel like they can do, because there's a fear that if they say the wrong thing, that they'll get booted off of these platforms that they depend upon to pay their bills. And if we can get people out of that situation to where they're no longer dependent upon those platforms, and we can get these leaders the freedom and the ability to speak up and really start to share their mind without fear of loss or retribution, then we start to see radical change in the world. And so that's kind of really my strategy as far as how do we combat the scary things that are being implemented right now by governments and pharmaceutical companies. It's to speak up, but in order to speak up, people have to feel safe and that their incomes are not at stake. And so that's our goal. That's what we're doing.
Sounds like an incredible strategy. Thank you so much, Mike Dillard. So appreciate your time. Look forward to connecting. And to those thrivers out there, go and check out Mike's website. It's incredible. His podcast is just superb. I mean, it's been voted top 10 podcast in terms of, I think, personal mastery. Top 0.5% of all podcasts worldwide, over 5 million downloads. It's just incredible. A human being that serves society. He serves so many people, and it's a servant-heartedness that has just drawn me to Mike. It's also his insatiable desire to keep learning, to keep distilling, to keep educating people, making it simple, making it complicated. It's for everyone out there. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Steve. It was a pleasure. Thank you all so much.